All right, Alan, we're going to jump right in, and I want to start with Julius Randle. Look, if you don't vote for Julius Randle for most improved, I think you've got some kind of agenda. I mean, he is, I think, clearly the most improved player in the league. The question I have is kind of, how did he get here? And what differences are we seeing in Randle? Last year, he was good. I mean, he averaged right around 20 points per game.
Mm-hmm.
Shot 46% from the floor. The three-point shooting is obviously a big difference, but you watch this team on a daily basis, watching them last year as well. Like, what are the differences you see in Julius Randle?
Well, the numbers aren't hollow anymore, right? Like, that's really the difference, because you're right. His numbers, he's always had good numbers, but it never really led to winning. And so I think really the difference with him has been the fact that it's contributing to winning. Now, how much of that is him just deciding, hey, I want to win this year? I mean, we always say that, contributing to winning, but it obviously takes the situation you're in, the surroundings, the coaching, all that stuff. So I just think for him, it's a perfect storm, because he said this. Tom Thibodeau is the right coach for him. He's one of these guys that wants to be coached hard, that wants to be coached tough, that he needs that. And I also think something very subtle that the Knicks did this year, obviously there's a salary cap, but there isn't one on coaching staff. And bringing in Kenny Payne was everything for him. That's the guy that had him as an 18-year-old at Kentucky. They got back to their pregame routines. He's the one that decided to be in the best shape of his life, so he's not tired late in games, that he can get up and down the floor, they can carry these big minutes. That and the three-point shooting. The fact that he shoots over 40% from three, and it's like a legit 40%. It's not like, well, he only takes one or two a game. Like, he's making threes on a regular basis like some of the best shooters in the game are making. So it's just for him. It's all come together for him now at this point in his career, and it's the hard work paying off. And it is absolutely a credit to him, but you have to also include the fact that he's in an environment that has allowed this to come to fruition as a winning environment for him.
See, now, the thing that I look at is that, okay, he's the same basic player, right? This is a much better version of that player, but it's not just the three-point shooting, which is a huge leap, the kind of leap we rarely even see with a guy in his seventh year. But his passing, too, his playmaking, like the ball's in his hands a ton, and it's not just black hole Julius Randle that we saw at times in New Orleans or maybe early in his career in L.A. So, like, these are, whether it's coaching, whether it's conscious decision on his part, this is just a more well-rounded, refined, winning version. It's not just, numbers sometimes contribute to winning and sometimes they don't. It's not an accident. Like, he's doing more to foster that. Like, where do you think that element comes from? Being self-aware enough that, like, you know what, it's not just about me scoring.
Yeah, he's not in the blender, and turning the ball over on spin dribbles, which was only a year ago. I mean, I know it sounds trite, Howard. It really is film study. It's a system where they made him the engine of the offense. It's him admitting. I thought, him admitting in the Players Tribune article that he wrote back in a couple months ago before All-Star, where he said, I watched myself and it's not the player I wanted to be. And he got to watching film. They watch film regularly. Of course, that's what Tibbs does. He's all about film, and he's embracing it. So he also knows where his teammates are supposed to be. And then you credit that part of it, which in the second half of the season, like, what blows my mind, guys, is the Knicks don't have any shooters on their team. Let's be honest, right? They don't have a team where you're like, oh, those guys are shooters. They're not shooters, but they're makers. They're guys that Reggie Bullock and who's known as a three-point shooter, but not a great one. He's become amazing. Why? Because he's always in the passing angle. And Julius always sees him nearby. And that's coaching. That's system. That's what they're setting up. You get into the eye of the passer, and Julius, to his credit, knows where everybody's supposed to be. And so I do think that contributes it. Can't we sometimes just have a player who matured? And literally, I think that's really what this is. This is a guy who always had talent, who always had great potential, but realized it because he matured. Now, he wasn't immature. I'm not trying to suggest he was like a immature kid, bad guy. It's just, I think maturity comes about to a point where you just realize, like, you know what? I got to put in the work. And if I do, it'll pay off. And it did. I mean, is it Chauncey Billups-like? Is it something like that? Like, because I can't find another player that this late in his career has made such a dramatic change in the type of player he's become.
No, Chauncey is a good comparison because it took Chauncey, 3 or 4 teams before he kind of settled into a situation that worked, that he, figured his game out. Alan, I'm old enough to remember a time when Tom Thibodeau was a questionable choice as the Knicks head coach, when people were skeptical of bringing Thibodeau. It's kind of looked at as almost the CAA pipeline. Leon Rose hires Tom Thibodeau. his former client. But, I mean, Tibbs is right up there with Monty Williams and Quinn Snyder as the front runners for Coach of the Year. I mean, where do you see his biggest impact? I mean, what's impressed you the most about, the job Tom Thibodeau has done?
Well, first of all, Tom Thibodeau is the coach. I'll say this is the team New York didn't know it needed. Julius Randle's the star they didn't know they wanted, and Thibodeau is the coach they didn't know they didn't know they wanted also, because it's the same thing. It was that, he's going to run guys into the ground. His way doesn't work anymore.
Which is always, by the way, that's always been one of the most misleading things about Tibbs. Yes, he does play guys heavy minutes during games, but he's not a grinded out guy at practice. He's never been that guy that runs 4-hour practice. Stan Van Gundy was that guy. I don't know that Tibbs was ever that guy.
Still is, by the way.
Stan is that guy.
But yeah, I think you're right about that part of it too. But a lot of the players will also tell you, especially guys that know him, and Derrick Rose and Taj Gibson, they do admit, though, he's different. And Tibbs has said that year off he went around the league and he started also to kind of look inside himself and maybe I need to change my ways a little bit. And he has done that. And they said he's a different guy, smiles more, which is hard to believe. But I just think the defensive foundation is everything, right? Because you don't have to have a lot of talent to be a good defensive team. The buy-in's the hardest part, especially in today's NBA, especially when you have a young team, which he does. It's a young team. But every guy I've talked to, and I've done interviews, I've done events with guys like even Emmanuel Quickly, Obi Toppin, like those young guys, they love him. They absolutely love him. They trust him. They believe in him. And it starts with, of course, the star. The buy-in from the star, the lead guy, everybody else follows. So that is why it's not so bad sometimes to hire people you know. CAA connection. Leon's hiring a guy he knows. Well, sometimes that's the right thing to do because there's a trust already built in that, as we know, Tom didn't have that in Chicago, and it didn't really work out for him when he had all the power in Minnesota. So all he wants is a say. He's got it. He's got the trust of people. He's got a coaching staff that he got his guys in, but they also added pieces. I just think this was the situation that he's rejuvenated. But I go back to the defensive foundation. That's the foundation of the success of this team starts there. And, that's not something you've been able to say about the Knicks since, of course, the 90s.
Well, it's funny, Alan, because this actually echoes what you were just saying about Julius Randle. Can't a guy just mature? Again, not that Tom Thibodeau was immature, but no, Randle still 7 years in could learn to be a better version. Tom Thibodeau has learned to be a better version of himself. Like, yes, he had success as the lead assistant in Boston and success as the head coach in Chicago. He did stumble on multiple levels in Minnesota. This doesn't erase that. He took the year off and did what a lot of coaches do, made the rounds, picked up some new ideas, came back a slightly different version. That's fine. Coaches can evolve too. It's a good thing. So 3 things about this team, Alan, and the thing I keep saying about this Knicks team, similar to like the Phoenix Suns. The best thing about the NBA, and especially a season like this, is it's always the stuff you can't see coming. You throw 3 superstars together and they go and they contend for a championship. Okay, it can be fun, but mostly if you're a fan of that team or just a fan of good basketball, we need suspense. We need surprises. We need to be like delighted sometimes. And that's what the Knicks have done. You couldn't see this coming. Not even the most Pollyannish Knicks fans predicted this.
Absolutely true.
And so there are 3 things that are the biggest surprise. Number 4 defense in the league. Like, it was in January, it was like, oh, that's nice. Now it's like, no. This is real, and it's legit, and it's sustained. The defense is 4th in the league. Randle took this big leap to where he's now under all NBA consideration. And then RJ Barrett. What rank those most to least or least to most surprising? And then because we've covered the other things to an extent, give me your sense of like what Barrett's leap was.
Yeah. Can I add one too? Because being top 5 in 3-point shooting blows my mind right now.
Absolutely.
Absolutely blows my mind. That's been a huge part of their winning streak going into tonight's game. Power ranking them though, I would probably say the most surprising has to be Julius Randle. Because I'm one of those guys, and I had to go into the confessional, and I did it early in the season. I was the guy that's like, all right, well, they just drafted Obi Toppin. That's the replacement. He's the National Player of the Year. Julius Randle, get his usual 20 and 8 out of him and then trade him by March, and let's move on, right? Like, that's all I was thinking. Let's hope he has a good season so he has value. And once we got to about January, I'm like, maybe you don't want to trade this guy, and then now you're like, wait a minute, you might have a foundational piece. So, no one saw that coming. He even admitted that he had to make changes. So it's not like we underestimated him. I think he just changed everything about him and the perspective about him. So that's the most important. Number 2, I would say, would be the defense. Just being that, and you say number 4, that's defensive rating, of course. I'm looking at scoring defense, field goal defense, 3-point defense. That's all number 1, and that's a big part of this too. Even though they play a slow pace, still they make you work for every shot. Because by the way, guys, they're not even top 10 in steals. They're not top 10 in forcing turnovers. They're not top 10 in blocks. So they're not doing things defensively that stop you. They're just making you uncomfortable when you shoot the basketball. That's real defense. So that also, to me, seeing a group like this thrive so much on defense. So that's 2. 3 is Barrett, because I always liked him. And Barrett is a guy that, and I'll expand now on Barrett a little bit. Barrett's a guy that was so underestimated in that draft because he wasn't Zion. And remember I told you, so Julius is the star the Knicks fans didn't know they needed. Thibodeau is the coach the Knicks fans didn't know they needed. And R.J. Barrett is actually the young guy you didn't know you needed because they were all consolation prizes, by the way, right? All of them. And yet they've turned out to be the most significant, lovable team they've had in 8 years, maybe more, because not everybody loved that Melo team. So Barrett is that guy that just cool under pressure throughout his whole life as a basketball player at Scholastic in college. He's always been one of the best players of his class, and yet never got all the recognition because he's not an exciting player. He doesn't do anything dynamic, but yet every night he'll start out 1 for 8. Some guys go in the tank. He's 20. He doesn't do that. He goes 1 for 8. He just keeps playing hard. He already has 7 rebounds. Then later in the game, there's this little pocket of the game where he gets a matchup he wants. He gets a couple of easy baskets. He gets to the basket. He can score. He gets to the free throw line. Next thing you know, he's making 3 threes. And I'm hearing from Drew Hanlon going, see his balance, see his set. I've been working with him. So you just start to see the evolution of a player who just doesn't let bad play bother him. And that's uncanny for a young player because we forget that he was born in 2000. We were all covering the league back then, and he was born then. It blows my mind. But so I think RJ is a story that's, of course, underrated with this group. And he's a very important piece of what they're building going forward.
You get those texts from Drew Hanlon. I mean, when Jason Tatum goes for 40, I get the same ones. And somebody down in D.C., David Aldridge might be getting them for Bradley Beal when he goes off for 40+. They're
but
fun
good for
texting.
him, though. Good for him because Knicks fans kill him on Twitter when RJ has him, misses 2 shots in a row. So,
last question for me, Alan. That happens in the playoffs is gravy for this season. It's icing on the cake. But I mean, what does this team need now? As you start to think about, what's the next step? I mean, whether it's this season or beyond, what's the next thing this team needs? If Randall's now a core piece, if RJ Barrett's now a core piece, if you got the coaching situation settled down for the first time in like a generation, what's the next piece this team needs to take that next step?
Yeah, it's easy. And it used to feel like it was the main piece, and now it feels like, and I hate to say it like this, but it sounds weird, it might be a final piece. It's been a piece they've been chasing forever. It's like the Jets on a quarterback. They need a point guard. They don't have a legit starting point guard. Elfrid Payton is just playing, but he's not really a legit starting point guard. In fact, he's become a net negative when he's out there. Derrick Rose is really their main point guard. He just doesn't start. He can't carry big minutes. So if they can find that piece, which has been the eternal search since forever, I think that changes everything. And I mean a legit get into the paint, score kind of point guard, organizer, can, late in games, that's a major problem for this team at times, especially against good defense where they just can't get organized. They get bad possessions. And in a playoff series against good teams, that's going to cost them, of course. That'll be their weakness, is their inability to get good possessions in crunch time. If they can find one, and they're hard to find, as we know, and it's got to be the right guy because it's Tom Thibodeau, then, they suddenly can transform into a serious contender, I dare say, if things stay the same.
So last one for me. They're right now, as we speak, slotted in that 4-5 range where they'd have a good chance of winning their first round game, and then you got to deal with the big boys in round 2. There's still the possibility, though, just they're not that far out from the play-in slots. They could still have to find a way to play in, be 7th or 8th, and now you're dealing with the Nets or Sixers or Bucks possibly right off the top.
Yeah.
What do you think so far of where they stack? I mean, we are getting way ahead of ourselves for a team that wasn't even expected to make the playoffs, much less, now we're talking about second round. Now we're talking about, but hey, look.
We don't do that in New York. What are you talking about, Howard?
Never. Yeah. But that's the fun of this is like the possibilities now seem Higher. Like, I think Knicks fans will actually be disappointed if they lost in the first round or if they didn't at least make the second round. And I think everything, like there is no downside for anything that happens from this day on in this season. It doesn't matter. They've established themselves, they've established their credibility, and that they should be considered a destination again. So they're fine regardless. But just for fun, Alan, if it comes down to it, like, do they have a shot against one of those teams at the top? Do you think that they're suited to, or at least pushed one of those to their limits?
No, I don't think the top 3 seeds. You can see how they matched up against them in the regular season. I don't think they have a win. Maybe the Bucks. They might have. Yeah, they have a win.
2-1 against the Bucks. They're 0-3 against the other 2.
Yeah. They have the 1 win against the Bucks, where, if I'm not mistaken, 4 of the 5 starters didn't play in that game. So, not quite the Bucks, the JV. And I'm a realist on that one. Technically, they are actually closer though to 3rd than they are to 7th, which is hard to believe, but true. It's amazing. 4 games out of the loss column going into tonight behind the Bucks, who just keep losing games that they shouldn't be losing. But yes, I understand. There is sort of this feeling of, let's get greedy, right? Oh, wait, you're the 4th seed. Well, hang on to the 4th seed. Guys, there's a 6-game West Coast trip coming up after Wednesday, which, as we know, it's like the march of death. I mean, you're playing Denver in Denver. You're playing both LA teams. You've got Memphis off a back-to-back when you come from Houston to Memphis, which is not easy the way Memphis plays. That's a hard-playing team. So, then you play Phoenix as well, who's obviously playing great. That's a rough trip. I mean, what are you hoping to get out of that trip? And then you come home, and then you have like 3 – they feel like must-win home games with Charlotte and Boston, your last 2, which could be proceeding, especially Boston. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but I'm feeling like, house money is anything as if you could stay 4 through 6, that's great. It used to feel like, hey, just getting the 7-10, anything can happen. But now, yes, Howard, you're right. Now there's this feeling of you really need to stay in the top 6 and actually have a playoff series. And I feel like even a first round with a gentleman's sweep would be a more successful season than the Nets losing in the finals, right? If you can say in New York, I bet you it'll be looked at that way because of everything you said. The expectations are much different, but they got to get there first.
I agree.
Yeah, no question. Alan, we appreciated this trip down the memory lane to the Knicks press room circa 2010. We will get you a nice soft pretzel on your way out and some chips, whatever's left over in there. But we appreciate it, man. Keep up the great work. Yeah, no, that's always the case, but
No, it's great to